Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of South Pub Sunday. Today we're joined by Michael Schultheiss. Close enough.
Schultheiss is fine, but
Schultheiss.
close enough for government work.
Better than I was saying it before, so it's closer.
I'm the one with the crazy last name.
Michael is the author of the Rostoval saga. Did I say that right?
It's totally fine. I always say Rostoval saga, but as with my name, it's good business, good manners. Whatever you want to say, it's totally fine. I'll answer to it. And so will he.
Right now we have 3 books. Is that correct?
Yes. The Altar of My Fate, The Spiral of My Destiny, and The Third Way of My God. But we have book 4, The Shadow of My Vision, coming out very soon.
Excellent.
Probably early August at the latest.
All right. So I want to start with a quick icebreaker while people kind of trickle in and get settled in. So I started off as a writer before I realized I was more of a reader than a writer, and I spent big bucks on getting a master's degree in creative writing.
Oh, wow.
And so I learned all about different writing routines and writing styles, and I was wondering if you could tell us about your writing routine. Say you have like one entire day free to just write. What's your writing routine?
So the way it works for me is writing is like fitness. You need routine if you want results. My key thing is I have to do my workout. I work out 6 out of 7 days a week. Today, Sunday, is my day off. But I have to do some actual exercise. I have to actually go out and get my heart pumping and my body. Like, I'm in my body. I'm awake. I'm aware. I've had some breakfast. I've had some coffee. I'm a caffeine addict. So once I've got all that done, it's all taken care of, then I can sit down or stand, actually. I'm standing now. I stand when I write. And I pull up my music. I have like progressive house and techno kinds of things, melodic, that whole world. It's great. It's just perfect because it's complicated enough. Like, it's like ear candy. It's like, okay, there's enough here for my mind to be excited. I'm like, all right, we're going to do this. But not so much that I get overwhelmed. Oh, no, I'm just looking to the music. You got to be present. You got to be able to put your mind into the stream of what you're going to be doing. So the music that I listen to helps with that. And I'll take some time and I'll be, okay, self, what are we writing today? Well, we're going to do this part. Well, let's throw out some ideas. What's going to happen? You had some ideas before. What about fleshing those out a little bit? And then you actually get in and you do it. And you do that when you're like, okay, you've done enough spitballing, enough like, well, okay, here's some bullet points. Now we'll go forward and we'll actually write the thing. And that's what we're seems to work for me. Sometimes you get kind of bogged down. You're like, oh, this is not a very good day. Well, keep going. Keep doing it anyway. Because eventually the magic will come back. The flow state will come back. It always does.
Awesome. We've got Stephanie here. Hello, Stephanie.
Howdy.
And John is here to chew bubblegum and disrupt.
Oh, John! I know John. He's awesome. He likes orcs, as I understand it. Very fond of orcs.
Yep. I mean,
John, great to see you, buddy.
So I want to talk about your writing career for a little bit.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it'll be great.
So did you always want to be a writer, or did you come to writing later in life?
My mom will tell you I was spouting out stories about made-up continents before I was old enough to be able to write at all. So pretty much the very short version is that when John's right, orcs are the best. They're awesome. I have ogres in my books, by the way. So I was trying to write things when I was, a teenager, and I was really into science fiction and H.G. Wells and Ray Bradbury was the other one. I still love both of those authors. Very, very wonderful. And so I tried to do that. And then, I had this idea that I would go to college and get an anthropology degree, not the most marketable thing. But I did that. And I always kind of loved history. And so I've done a lot of kind of self-study with history. And so it's just a sort of evolving story that I've been sort of self-authoring for a long time. And it took me much of my 20s and 30s to get to where, like, okay, I'm ready to publish this book. Imperfections and all, but you got to get some way. It's like, okay, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
We're going to get better. We're going to get better with time, putting more books out there. So you just, like, at some point, you just got to launch. That's the very short version.
All right. So you mentioned H.G. Wells.
Oh,
Who are
yeah.
your writing inspirations, or
when I was very young, I loved all of that. But over time, I migrated. I kind of got into epic fantasy in a big way. I mean, Lord of the Rings, who hasn't? I would say my greatly summarizing, it was sort of like I started with Tolkien, and then it was kind of like when I was in my teens getting back into fantasy, I read a lot of Terry Brooks, sort of Shannara. I read Terry Goodkind, although there's a lot of asterisks and a lot of reservations around that series for me now. That's another tangent. David Eddings, there's some, anyway, that was me 17, 18. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so incredible. Right. And then with time, I got a little older and kind of got into Brandon Sanderson, an author I still love and go back to a lot. Jim Butcher, Dresden Files, love those books. But my aesthetic inspirations are kind of, I would say, more, I'm a huge fan of Dune by Frank Herbert. Love that book. And the author who I pretty much worship the ground beneath his feet right now is, besides Frank Herbert, who, of course, God tier, of course, R. Scott Baker, the Prince of Nothing series that starts with the darkness that comes before. And then, what is it? The Warrior Prophet and the Thousandfold Thought. Those books blew my mind. And so those are that's kind of where I'm, at this point, I'm like, I just want to write the way that R. Scott Baker does, the way that Gene Wolfe, Shadow and Claw. And Christopher Ruwakio, man, Sun Eater. Those are some really compelling books. I'm still working on book. What is it now? I'm just on book 2, so I haven't gotten very far into them yet. But anyway, that's kind of the essence of it. The other thing, of course, is real world history. I'm fascinated by history. I love history. So diving in. Oh yeah, Baker. Nicely, another R. Scott Baker fan.
So I want to talk kind of a spoiler-free chat about The Altar of My Fate first. Congratulations on getting an SPFBO, by the way.
Thank you so much. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah. So I want to talk spoiler-free for those out there that haven't read The Altar of My Fate yet. And then after we talk spoiler-free, we'll slide into spoiler talks. So I know you've been preparing it. Give us your elevator speech.
All right. I have it right here on my Scrivener file. Okay, elevator pitch. If you like sword and sorcery fantasy featuring a daring, morally gray barbarian warrior prince for a protagonist, if you like the allure of adventure and battle in distant lands, if you like ancient secrets and arrogant immortals, and if you're amenable to a sultry slave girl as the female lead, I'm just saying, then The Altar of My Fate might be the epic fantasy adventure you've been craving. Pick it up on Kindle and other ebook platforms wherever fine books are sold. Get it now.
All right. So what makes The Altar of My Fate different than other books of its kind?
That's a great question. I'd say, first of all, I see these books as exercises in deep ecology. I'll mention this along the way. So these are not fantasy version of medieval Europe. Nothing. This is Middle East, South Asia, Eurasian steppe. Those are my real world influences. There's some African stuff in there too, desert, and that's a bit more tangential. I am fascinated by non-Western cultures and by Western cultures too. So I like to learn about all of it, the 300,000-year view of human behavior. So I use a lot of very influences that to a Westerner will seem pretty exotic. It might not to somebody who's from some of these cultures or has a background in some of, Assyrians and Medes and Persians and farther back, the Proto-Indo-European migrations, the deep history of India. Like someone like, oh yeah, this is going to be more accessible. I like to try to give you a perspective that's not informed by our modern sets of viewpoints. That is, and R. Scott Baker, I think, does this very well, pretty much, in the sense that this is not going to be easy if you are looking for, okay, I don't want too much adult content. I don't want too much. There's a lot of violence and sensuality and a lot of things that reflect a pre-modern and especially a pre-axial age Weltanschauung or worldview. And I I'm trying to get you to see to. It doesn't mean we don't have our moral values, because we do. We can compartmentalize for the purposes of perception, of understanding how people in past cultures and societies would have understood themselves, as opposed to how we would understand them. And it doesn't mean that we have to compromise our beliefs, only that we have more humility, hopefully, in trying to understand the human condition, including ourselves and the past. So that's kind of that's kind of my nerdy answer. I'd say that the less nerdy answer is, this is a very epic adventure. There is a lot of just exploits to be had. And if you like really adult themed fantasy, this is the book I have personally been waiting to read since Edgar Rice Burroughs. I wrote it because I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
That's the essence of it.
So, where did you get the idea from?
Well, reading history, you find that there's a recurrent pattern of great warrior kings founding a dynasty, and a great empire comes into power. And I just got fascinated by this theme of great conquerors as these agents of history. And what you find as you go on with time and you learn more about history is that there's a lot of social and political trends and forces that go into this sort of Carlylean view of the great man of history. There's always more to it than that. And you can combine both perspectives and understand, the ecology. One thing that you'll see in my books is, the people up north have the horses, and they're these, like these proud, mounted archer warriors. And some of them are south of the desert too, but there it's dependent on importing horses. Why? Well, tropical grasslands are not good for Eurasian. Well, horses are from Eurasia. For horses, so you have to import them for the most part historically. And you get these big picture patterns that recur, and over time too, you just get fascinated by the stories in history that have to do with great adventure. Going out into the frontier, and many different cultures have these stories. I was Russian history, the Cossacks and fighting the Mongols and all that, and go farther back, the Mongols conquering everything. I was fascinated with Genghis Khan when I was a very young boy. So, history is a big part of it. One second, I need to drink the water. Sorry. So history is a big part of it, but the other thing is just the fantasy. You read enough fantasy, you read A Song of Ice and Fire. Those books just rock my world. Oh my goodness. Different characters. They have good and bad aspects, and that gets you to think about human beings and how, it's as my mother would say, we're all Beauty and the Beast to a degree. And there's a bit of that in these books as well, I think.
Yeah. So when you sat down to write The Altar of My Fate, what came first to you, the characters or the story?
The world, because it was actually originally something else. That's another long tangent. It was backstory for something else, because it was world building, and I said, I'm going to have a great adventurer and conqueror here, and then I turned him into a character, and then it's just like, oh my goodness, I have to do this. And so I made multiple efforts to tell the story, and I had to learn, kind of cut my eye teeth on writing novels to get to the point where, okay, now I have something that I actually want to share with the world. But yeah, the world is probably the best way to answer that, with the proviso that over time I changed the world quite a lot and gain more historical knowledge and try to put that in there too.
Sure. So now I want to slide into some spoiler chat. So for anyone out there that hasn't read The Altar of My Fate yet, and you don't want to be spoiled about what happens, go and read the book and then come back and watch the rest of this chat. But if you've read it before or you want to stick around anyways, you're welcome to stick around.
Sounds great.
I just like to give that little warning ahead of time so people don't get mad.
Absolutely. Very important.
So my first spoiler question is kind of a 2-for-1 question. And you can feel free to answer one or both of these or neither of them. People tend to think it's kind of like choosing their favorite kid. But then in the end, they come up with an answer anyways. So all of that to say, who is your favorite character And or who is the easiest character for you to write?
Rostov, so this is where I tell you that tell the readers that your audience. I can talk. The whole story, the whole series is his first person point of view. So he's telling you this story. So he is by far the easiest. He has my sense of sort of just vitalism in life, like loving life, wanting to be very, very passionate, very driven, very, going to go forth and conquer in a manner of speaking. And so he's by far the easiest, and I wouldn't have written these books from his point of view if that wasn't the case. I'd say let's see, who else do I favor? Well, he's definitely the easiest by a long shot, especially because over time, I mean, I'm a number of books in now, so it's like a bit more readily accessible at this point.
Yeah. So, who is your least favorite or the hardest character to write?
Oh, well, that's tricky. Okay, I'll just keep it to the characters in. Okay, I know. So, in Alter, you get a number of immortal beings, and I will say that probably the Bright Zayastera, these immortal, sort of glowing, exalted humans, it's tough when you take out the death drive. You don't have a person who is going to die and stay dead. So what do you make of this? How do you get into this person's head? Like,
yeah,
probably the very hardest. But I'll say that Haldua is the other one, and that's and he's on. This is an immortal being who is a different type of. The backstory is that he was a god. Now he is basically just a man, but except for the neat little thing that he dies and comes back and loses his memory when he does that, and that's a thing that happens every 250 or so years. People in this book have an extended lifespan because of the magic that gives them about 2.5 centuries, sometimes a little bit more. He gets that, and then he comes back. And that's tough because, like, he doesn't need to eat or drink. He doesn't have a lot of what motivates us is like, hey, we don't get a lot of time on this rock. We're going to die. And you can be terrified of that. I choose to accept it and say, I'm going to put my life into creating good things. And what about this character, though? Because he doesn't have that. It's like, well, you try. I think he's compelling on the whole, but it's still kind of like, what's going on here? He's 10,000 years old. He's so removed from humanity. And he kind of knows it. So, I think he's interesting and poignant, but it is kind of tough. It's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a fascinating problem that I gave myself. We'll see if it lands for readers.
All right. Now I want to switch and talk about scenes.
Okay.
So did you have a favorite scene in The Altar of My Fate?
Oh man. Okay. So the one I thought you'd ask this, and so the one that I'm gonna say is there's two of them. There's the scene. I don't know how far you got. We can touch on that too. But there's a scene where my protagonist's mentor, Calliope, returns a slave girl that he took from a rival tribe to her people, does this whole thing. I return her to you, and then she kills the crap out of him. And I set that whole thing up. But I think for a lot of readers, it's still going to come at them like, now it all makes sense. And then she takes his powers, and it's this whole thing that he set up. He set this up so that he would die, give her his powers, and she would be the heir who would lead her people into an alliance with Rostoval. You have this sort of alliance across different tribal cultures who are coming together against Rostoval's own grandfather, there's a dynastic, a family rivalry there, I guess you'd say. So the people up north of the desert are trying to go south and take over and get spoils, and Rostoval is doing that. But so is his grandfather, who has. So they need an alliance, is the point, and so then that whole scene, for me, is just like, it was a lot of fun. It was very rewarding, and also a thing that when it came to it was like, oh, that's so great, I should do that. So that's probably my favorite. The battle at the end is pretty epic, and that's the only one that's, I'd say, yeah, that's about on the same level. I love a lot of scenes in that book, but those two, especially that first one, I'd say my favorite.
Okay. On the reverse side of things, what was the hardest scene to write?
That is a, well, let's see. I'm not really sure offhand. I think that there were a couple parts of the book early on where I was trying to sort of, I was still figuring out. It's my first book. I would acknowledge it has some imperfections. I think probably some of those were a little bit harder earlier on. I think it kind of takes a few chapters to really find its feet and get everything set up. So probably some of that would be the hardest. And I've gotten, frankly, like I hope it's not too hard for readers to get through. I don't think that it will be for someone who's going to be the right kind of reader for this. But my beginnings get a lot better from book 2 on. So if it's like okay, you're taking some time to get this set up, I promise you, it gets a lot more fast paced from book 2 on. I think it won't be too bad for people who like kind of this immersive fantasy world experience to get through those first few chapters in Altar. First 3 or so.
What do you want readers to come away with after reading The Altar of My Fate?
Escapism and adventure is a big part of it. If you want an immersive fantasy world with an adventure that's going to sweep you away to distant lands, and you have all these exotic adventures, and that's a big part of it. But the other thing is, I'm trying to encourage a sense of understanding fantasy worlds at our own with a sense of deep ecology. You take not just the geography. You think about any animal for a moment. Just say any living being, but say any animal. That animal interacts with its environment. We talk about, a wolf preys on deer. Okay, but there's also parasites that will, be in either one of those or both of those. There's also things that compete with the wolf, like the grizzly bear in North America. There's also animals that the wolf will kill like the coyote again in North America to as part of a guild competition, predator competition. And human beings, we think that we're so above all that, but we're not. We have more complicated adaptations for dealing with our physical environments that create complicated social environments and political and economic and technological. And I want to help people understand how a culture evolves to see itself and what that looks like. And so we can set, it doesn't mean don't have your judgments too. We all have them. You can't get away from that. But maybe just have some more empathy for how the world looks to somebody who is not you now. Taking into account all of the different forces of history that may come to bear on an individual in their point of view and in their society. So that sense of deep ecology is definitely something that I want to encourage people to understand, especially with regards to, as I touched on before, the very different value systems that these people have, these very pre-axial age systems of values. The axial age is the millennium before the Common Era, or before Christ, take your pick, that gives rise to a lot of our value systems. But even a lot of pre-modern cultures, including many that have some of those systems, didn't have a lot of our modern values. So there can be kind of I'm trying to help you to understand, like, there's this divide here between us now in the modern age and most people across most of history until very recently. So I'm hoping to promote some, cognitive empathy without saying change your values, just be able to look beyond them. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can have some humility when we see that we are inevitably influenced by everything around us.
Okay. So lastly, I want to talk about the future of this series. So you mentioned that you've got book 4 coming out soon. Yes. How big of a series do you anticipate this to be?
I anticipate right now 7 books. Now I'll tell you this. I'm gonna spill the beans on the YouTube channel too, but I'll tell you this now. I need to come clean. I wrote what started out as book 4, but it was so big that I thought, okay, Self, your drafts always get bigger when you go back. So this is already at a point where you might want to think about, putting this into 2 books. So this is a 1 story, but maybe have 2 books. And so I went back and I worked and it got bigger and bigger. I was like, okay, we have to do 2 books. So book 4 is coming out, but book 5 is written. it's done. I have to go back and do a little bit more change, but the text is there. So book 4 will come out, as I would say, I'm going to just be safe side, early August. If I can do it sooner, I will. If I can do it before the end of the month here, I will. And then book 5 will come out shortly thereafter. I'm going to say end of August or very early September at the latest is looking likely. So after that, I'm going to take a little break, write some things that are not Rostov Saga. And I'm anticipating one more big story told across 2 books for a grand total of 7 books.
Okay, excellent. Is there anything that you want to tell us about the other non-Rostovel books?
Well, I have a lot of things coming, so I'll tell you offhand that there is a couple things. Okay, first of all, if the Rostovel Saga is not, I say this in a video coming out too, but people who don't think that the Rostovel Saga is for them might still find some of the other stuff to their taste, because I have a space opera planned. That's going to be a fun. I'm thinking a much shorter, like a standalone adventure. If people like it, I could write sequels, but my wife was like, honey, write a standalone, write a short standalone. Okay, honey, she's my wife is amazing. She's the best human being I know. And she's almost always right about these things, like 99.999% of the time. So we're like, okay. At first I was that's like, no, she's right. You just got to do it. So I have that. I have something else coming out that's going to be a futuristic urban fantasy in a world that's ruled by these kind of angelic beings. And then there's a kind of a civilizational conflict, cycle of instability, and some fun magic stuff coming too. So those are the 2 things that I'm going to tease right now, because I'm confident I'll actually have them out to people in the next little bit, the next several months to within the early part of next year.
Okay.
So those are the 2 things that I'll tease right now. And again, if the Rostovel Saga is not for you, you might still find them to your taste. It's going to be a very different ball of wax, as it were, so to speak.
Sure. Well, Michael, those are all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to just note that, and I there is a content warning on Alter now. Can I read that real quick? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll explain why it wasn't there before. All right, here we go. Okay, content warning. The Altar of My Fate contains mature themes of violence, sensuality, slavery, and concubinage for mature, daring readers only. And I will tell you that I initially, before I published, thought, maybe I should do a content warning. Then I thought, well, no, Self, maybe if you do that, maybe you're kind of infantilizing people. Like, don't you trust readers to know what's good for them? So I didn't do it, and I feel kind of bad, and I'm sorry for anyone who had a bad experience. But I thought subsequently and very recently, Self, maybe you should. Because someone asked a question on Goodreads, and I'm like, okay, maybe I should just do that. So it's up there now. Certainly, I'm trying to do people a solid. I just figure, if I can warn you off if it's not for you, or maybe that's actually like, oh, hey, no, this is definitely for me. Like, right. So that's the thing where, I don't want anyone to have a bad time. And, my goal is always to entertain and delight people. So, that's the purpose of the content warning. That's why it's there now. And hopefully that kind of helps people understand if it's for them or not. And if it's not, no worries. I get it. People have different tastes. 100% reasonable and understandable.
I did give it a fair share. I always
and I'm sorry
books at least 100 pages before I decide, and most of the time I end up just pushing through. I know you're probably curious as to why it wasn't for me.
I figure it's probably the depiction of the rampant depictions of slavery. Everybody is just kind of cool with it. Whatever, it's just slavery.
So that was a big part of it. I was expecting, I got to, I think it was about 30% according to my Kindle.
Fair enough. That's a fair shake by any measure.
When we had that 3-year jump, that maybe some of the characters would kind of settle in, and that mindset would kind of calm down a bit. And I don't mind that mindset in, you know, like one or two or a couple, you know, handful of characters, but it was like everyone in the book.
Yes.
So it was a
Very
bit
fair. And again, I'm sorry that
overwhelming
you didn't
and
have a good time. And if I had understood, if I had my head on just a bit more, you know, like if I had had that thought process sooner, I would have told you, hey, content warning, by the way, just so you know. Now I do, and again, I certainly regret if anyone has a not very good experience with it. I'm hoping that now that it's out there, people will understand. Clearly, I mean, honestly, this might just be naivete. My thinking originally was, hey, the blurb says this, the cover says that, but I take your point. That's a good point.
yeah.
And the only thing that I would just tie that back into is my purpose in this book. And again, not for everyone. I totally empathize with the key theme here is to give you an immersive view. And I also don't think too that that depicting this and understanding it means that we endorse it. We don't.
Right.
But being able to see beyond our judgments and still have them, but to see a different perspective on things, even if it is a challenge at times, I think is inherently valuable. And that's again a key part of the purpose of the book. But not for you. I respect it. Just sorry you didn't have a good time.
No, it's it led to this chat, so
well, there you go.
Consider it anytime I can support writers in any way, even if it's not the right book for me. I don't consider it a waste of time.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are out there creating these worlds I would never be able to create. I wrote nonfiction. I just wrote from my family history. So
family history. That sounds fascinating.
It is a crazy family saga from the early 1900s. My great grandpa, I think that's the right amount of greats. My grandpa's grandpa was a semi-famous American landscape painter. And so part of my thesis was about kind of his story as a painter, and then part of it was about this woman that came into his life under the guise of helping him. This was in New York City in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Fascinating time period.
Yeah, he had 9 kids and no money. And he had severe schizophrenia.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he was the last 30 years of his life, he was in and out of mental institutes, and the different personas that he believed he was were like, he I mean, thought like one day
tragic, but that's also fascinating. Sorry, I'm like,
yeah. One day it was like Julius Caesar. The next day it was like a soldier for General Grant, or Indian war chief. Like it like ran the gambit. He thought he was part of the Rothschild family. He made his own money on paper, and he was a crazy guy. But this woman came into his life under the guise of helping him, and she essentially became our family villain. And she set up this essentially foundation that was supposed to raise money for his family, because they were all living in a 1-bedroom house with no running water. And
oh my goodness.
All 9 of them. And she set up this foundation, raised a whole ton of money. One of his paintings, there was like this big auction, like that was supposed to, all the money went towards the foundation. It had like the most famous painters of the day. And, she sold one of his paintings for more, I don't know if you know painter names, but one of his paintings was sold more than a Renoir painting was sold.
Heard the name.
Big, like, impressionist painter. And she ended up basically taking all of that money herself.
Oh,
The
my
family never
goodness.
saw a single penny of it.
Oh, that's terrible.
And then, he ended up, when he died, they had, a big funeral service for him, and the president of the time was invited to the funeral, the president of the U.S.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the president.
The president. Okay.
He responded very nicely, saying if he knew about it earlier, he would have made time for it. And then a couple years down the road, she was found wandering the same streets that he was, also with schizophrenia.
This needs to be a book. This needs to be like maybe even a series of books.
So that's my crazy family.
That is fascinating. Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's all I've got. Is there anything else? Any questions or comments?
No. That's all I have. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover?
I think that's everything. But thank you
Okay.
so much for your time today. It's lovely to meet you.
You too, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And thank you to everyone out there who has joined us. And our next episode will be the 30th with Kian Ardelin, and we'll be talking about the 11th cycle with Kian. So come back and join us on the 30th, and I hope you all have a great night.
Take care.